Good morning. That antique Chinese vase or painting might cost you an extra 25% coming after September 1st in response to Trump's proposed tariffs on Chinese antiquities and art. Sotheby is in the news again with a Banksy 2 type episode in regards to their attempted selling of the world's first Porsche. And ethical philanthropy is what we're going to start off with here today on Behind the Gavel with Jason. I'm Jason Roski, the owner of the KC Auction and Appraisal Company here in Kansas City, Missouri. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have any questions, comments, concerns about what we're talking about or anything else in regards to antiques, art, and the estate auction industry, go ahead and post the comments here. Send us a private message. I'm going to share this on my personal page in just a second. And come right back to you. So today we're going to start with talking about ethical philanthropy. Recently, there's been a lot of news about the sources of funding for museums and institutions like that. Most recently, Warren Kanders was vice chair of the Whitney Museum and resigned from that position after 8 artists threatened to withdraw their works from upcoming exhibitions. And this is by no means an isolated incident. Recently, the Sackler family has been under the same kind of scrutiny, and the museums associated with that. Vulture.com just released an article on the most toxic board museums in New York City. And this issue goes back to back in the day, British Petroleum has come under fire. Philip Morris has come under fire for supporting their support of the arts. Not that they support them, but where the money comes in regards and relationship to that conversation. And it's a really interesting conversation to be had. Is the idea that they're supporting the arts outweigh the value of the money, or does the museum or should the museum take a stand and say, you know what, if our money comes from that source, we're no longer going to accept it, even though it may or may not impact the quality of work, the quality of our facility, the quality of what we can provide to our patrons. It's a really interesting topic to consider. You go back through history, a lot of the men who are considered evil historically, train barons, robber barons, all those kinds of things, have their names prominently displayed on public buildings and prominently displayed on museums and institutions. At what point do we take that into advisement or consideration for when you're accepting money to begin with, and then how far back do you go historically to change that narrative? Don't have an answer. I just thought it was an interesting thing. They're even talking, some of the articles I read, some of the interviews I read, talking about doing donor background checks to see where the funding is coming from for that person. So if you're going to write a check to a museum of a substantial size, they might run a background check on you to see where that money coming from. Obviously, if you're with the Sackler family, your money comes from, Oxycontin, or others. They might not take your money, which is a really fascinating thing. David Koch. It's a good and bad thing, I think, Wanda. Probably one of the biggest ones, David Koch fountains in front of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Jerry Saltz, who's a world-known art critic and commentator, I believe last year covered up Jerry Koch Plaza signs in the fountains and said climate change denier, which is a story in and of itself, but it really kind of goes to the heart of what we're talking about. If does the source of the funding for the person who's funding the institution, does that change the perception of the museum or institution that they're supporting? I think it obviously does. I think more and more people are looking at that as being as critical and as important to the foundation and the presentation and the appearance of the museum as the works that they are representing and showing. Hey, Vonda, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them. Let me know. Share, and for everybody else watching, go ahead and post your comments here. Share this with your friends if you think it's interesting, or hit the like button. We appreciate that going forward. The MMA Museum of Modern Art, Leon Black is our museum director. He has close ties with Jeffrey Epstein. Don't know where that relationship is, what it is exactly, but that taints his reputation because of his association with Epstein. And again, that conversation is going to go on for a long time. and probably never be adequately answered and solved for most, which is probably going to be right. You want to. It would be almost impossible to satisfy everybody around this conversation. But if you can do some things to, I can understand the position of both the boards, the museums, and the protesters and those who are concerned with it, stating that, hey, we don't want to have that representing our museum anymore. So that's going to be fascinating to watch. Next, we'll talk about the latest Trump tariff talks. I got to tell you, when I started this industry a long time ago, I never thought tariffs would be an issue with antiques and art. And somehow or another, it has become so. President Trump has reapplied the tariff conversation to antiques and art coming from China that are over 100 years old. This was presented last year. It was taken off of the paperwork at that point. It was removed as a tariff item. But the tariff coming up September 1st is going to be enacted against Chinese art and antiques, 25%. And of course, this is only going to apply to a small percentage of people, those who buy and sell Chinese art and antiquities, and then having a value that's going to be subject to this. But the ones who are, there's several groups who are very concerned or very interested in this conversation. Of course, high-end art and antique dealers. There's a lot of Chinese art and antique dealers in the United States, in the major cities, who count on the importing good quality merchandise for their customer base. And what's interesting about this tariff is that the item doesn't have to be coming from China. It just has to be made in China. And so you can be buying from Christie's London, or from any other source anywhere in the world, London, Australia, Africa. Doesn't matter where the object is sitting today. If it was made in China more than 100 years ago, you're going to pay tariff on it, which is just a fascinating thought process. I don't understand what the idea for that is, that he can sell to the public. Cynically, I look at it as China wants to repatriate as much of their art and antiquity as they can. They've been working on this for a long time. They've sued major auction houses. They've brought a lot of publicity to bear on this. We've talked about this before with the Summer Palace being raided in the 1860s after the Opium Wars, and those fine objects being distributed throughout the world. UNESCO has some staggering numbers on this as far as illicitly received art, antiques, and artifacts. And China's been working very, very diligently, both privately and publicly, to repatriate the best of their best and pieces that have historical importance to that country. Completely understandable. We do the same thing here. Every country wants back what was theirs. I understand that completely. How does a tariff help with that? Well, it helps in that it removes a major player from the international art and antiquity trade. If you're looking at buying a vase that's going to sell for $1 million at Sotheby's or Christie's or through a dealer, but you've got to pay $1.25 million for it, and your Chinese competitor only has to pay $1 million, well, that puts a huge advantage in the lap of the Chinese buyer. So why would this be important today? Well, let's look at who Donald Trump is and what he might want to be accomplishing with this tariff. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Donald Trump is trying to curry favor with President of China for future deals. And this has been talked about before. Obviously, Trump family is in the real estate business internationally, and so it wouldn't be a terrible thing for him and his family and his real estate companies to have curried favor with the Chinese government and president. And so I think that might be at the heart of it, that I haven't seen mentioned anywhere else. I'm sure it has been in certain conversations and publications, but in the bit of reading I've done on it, I haven't seen that angle, and I think it's probably worth looking into and considering, at least, as a reason for the tariff on Chinese art and antiques. Again, it won't affect our business. We don't import those kinds of things. We sell them, but they're already here in the country, so we're not having to worry about filling out paperwork and importing and exporting those objects. So it won't affect us, but it's just an interesting story in the world today. We're going to continue. We're going to wrap up today's conversation by talking about Sotheby's again. We seem to talk about Sotheby's a lot. This might be one of the reasons why they're trying to go private, to try and get some of this information out of the public eye, although they do a lot of work to continue to present themselves publicly. Just last week, R.M. Sotheby's had a concourse car auction, and one of the star items of that auction was the world's first Porsche. It's the Porsche 1939 Type 64. According to what they said, and we have to believe this, we've gotten done the research on it, there's only 3 of these cars made, and this is the only one to survive. It was being sold at Sotheby's, and auctioneer Martin ten Holder was the auctioneer, has a strong Dutch accent. And he started the bidding, I think, at 13 million. And the person working the keyboard there at Sotheby's thought he said 30 million and started receiving bids. And 30 million, then 30,500,000, then 40 million. And so what was evident to me as an auctioneer is that those numbers don't make sense. But in the heat of the moment, the person at the keyboard didn't catch it. The people in the audience didn't catch it, that you're going from 30 million to 30,500,000 to 40 million, but it was really 13 million, 13.5 to 14 million dollars is what he has said. Now, Sotheby's has a history recently about doing some interesting things. Look back at the shredded Banksy controversy. Hey, thanks, Gary. Thanks for watching. Again, if you have any questions or thoughts, go ahead and post them. You remember about a year ago, they sold the Banksy piece that as soon as they said sold, dropped through a shredder. Somehow or another, nobody in the Sotheby staff realized that the picture in frame was ridiculously heavy for what it was, because it was containing a shredder. Salvador Mundi has not been rectified, or there's a lot of concern and controversy around that. We talked just last week and the week before about the Colesman case, where the appraisal from Sotheby's, one of Sotheby's, I believe, vice presidents, was thrown out in court, causing their clients about $500,000. Sotheby's has been in the news a lot. I realized that this morning. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Obviously, they're getting publicity. They're getting commentary all over the world. They're in the ArtNet and Art News Daily and regularly about these different things. But it's really kind of fascinating and interesting to see what's going to happen when and if they do go private. Will these stories cease? Will having a singular director, somebody actually owns the company, change how they proceed as a business? Or will they, they kind of feel like, it feels to me like they're like a gunslinger. They're out there just winging it. They're whatever they need to do to get the job done, they're doing it. They're taking chances. And so it's just really fascinating to me to watch this. And again, how Sotheby's has all these stories out there is just kind of interesting. I don't see these stories in regards to Christie's or in regards to Heritage or other auction houses around the world. So there's something in the Sotheby's culture that is, at least on the outside, it looks like there's something in the Sotheby's culture that is encouraging these kinds of behaviors. And it's really interesting. I want to talk really quickly about, so the car, the auctioneer said it was at 17 million, the screen at 70 million. When the auctioneer realized it, he said, no, we're at 17 million, not 70. 70 is exciting, but 17 is where we're at. Unfortunately for the seller, $17 million did not meet the reserve. And so I'm curious how that conversation went afterwards, because the seller was either there or watching on their live cast. I wonder what that conversation with the seller was like afterwards, saying, "Oh, I'm sorry. I know it said 70 million, but we were only at 17, so we did not sell it. That's a $53 million mistake on our part." Of course, they hadn't said sold, so it didn't matter. Technically or legally, it's just an appearance thing. It also will probably put a cloud on that car going forward. One of a kind, first Porsche. It should be a historic car. There should be hundreds of people internationally interested and excited to own that automobile. Any museum in the world would love to have that. Private collectors would love to have that car. It should bring a significant amount of money, and it's a Porsche, for crying out loud. But it didn't sell that day, and I'm going to be curious to see when and where it pops up again, and to see what the selling price is then, and if the situation at Sotheby's affects value negatively. So I think that's about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. Tomorrow here in the Kansas City area, if you're watching me live on Facebook today, I will be in St. Joseph at the Albrecht Kemper Museum of Art at their antique appraisal event. If you have interest in that, drop me an email here. Find Albrecht Kemper online, Albrecht Kemper Museum in St. Joseph, Missouri, if you're in that area. It's quite reasonable to get these things looked at. You have to become a member of the museum. It's a museum drive and a fundraiser. I think membership is like $35, and it's $10 per item for appraisal. So I think there's a few slots left. They were scheduling them on specific times for different appraisers. Nan Chisholm from Antiques Roadshow is going to be there, and then several other local appraisers, and I'm pretty excited about that. Fantastic auction online right now for us right now. If you like antiques, art, jewelry, silver, furniture, we have kind of it all. We have close to 600 lots in our current auction, which is by far our largest auction of the year. I always love, I see people must be using the touchscreen. They move across. I see like 6 different emoticons go across at the same time. But thank you all so much for watching. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or thoughts, you can always post them here. If you're watching on YouTube or LinkedIn, you can post comments there as well. You can always send us a direct or private message through any of these platforms as well. And of course, you can always send us an email at info@kcauctioncompany.com, info@letter C auction company spelled out.com, or you can give us a phone call at 816-283-3633, 816-283-3633. My boy started school this week, so we're trying to get back in the school season schedule, although my eldest is a senior, so his schedule is much more fluid than it has been in the past. He has more free time, more abilities to come and leave school as is necessary, but of course he drives himself now with his own car, so that makes that much interesting and better and worse for parents. I'm sure all of you who have parents or have children who have grown up and in that age understand what I say when it's good and bad when they get their own car and freedoms. Thank you all so much for watching. We're going to talk to you again next Friday and Behind the Gavel with Jason. If you have any questions, again, let us know, and have a great weekend.